Welcome to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum's December edition of Drink and Draw, our last Drink and Draw for 2022. I would like to thank everybody for coming out tonight, especially those who missed us so much in November, but we're back in December, and we'll be back again in February as well. Of course, as always, tonight with me is Molly and our resident artist, Yvette. Yvette, how are you tonight?
I'm well. It's good to see you all.
Awesome, definitely. Before we get started, I just want to say a quick thank you to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support. Of course, this event is sponsored by the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation, with support for the foundation coming from the memory of Pat Finley. So we'd like to thank everybody for their support, of course. And tonight, we are going to be doing a Christmas edition of Drink and Draw. I will let Yvette talk about what that's going to entail. But before we get started, I just want to let everybody know that if you have any questions or any technical difficulties, you can send Molly or myself a chat in the chat box. We do have our security features enabled tonight, so nobody can unmute themselves or start their video. So anything that you need to communicate with us, please do so via the chat function on Zoom. Yvette, on that note, I'm going to turn it right over to you and let you get started.
All right. Well, thanks, Eric. And again, welcome everybody. I actually was just about to type. I saw Luis is joining us from Las Cruces, New Mexico. I am from Albuquerque, New Mexico. So that is extremely exciting to me to have somebody from my home state joining us this evening. Welcome to the program and welcome back, everybody. If I see Sherry, I see a few other folks that have joined us before. As Eric mentioned, I am Yvette Pino, YVETTE, she, her, hers, and I am the resident artist at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum and always happy to bring you our Drink and Draw program. Exciting news, I mentioned our last session that we were going to be reevaluating how Drink and Draw looked in 2023. We will be back. We are going to be doing every other month, and I'm going to be doing a little bit more in-depth lessons and tutorials, continuing sharing the same wonderful stories of our Wisconsin veterans. But no fear, we will be back, and we will be back starting February of 2023. And if you ever have any questions, you can always visit our website for the event at the events page. And Molly will share that at the end of the program, of course. Eric mentioned we are doing a Christmas theme. I'm going to say that's a loosely based Christmas theme. Molly, if you don't mind sharing the link, we're going to share a link to our object record at the Wisconsin Veterans Museum website. That's where you'll see the image. And then I'm using my iPad for tonight's tutorial, so you'll also be able to see the image on screen as well. But if you want a longer reference or you want a reference after the program, it shows the object that we'll be drawing. It also tells the little background story that I'll be sharing about what we are going to be featuring tonight. So I'm going to, without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. We do have closed captioning available. So if you can't see the closed captioning, there should be on the bottom of your screen a little CC that says hide captions or show captions. And you'll be able to see the closed captioning to read about what I'm saying. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen here, and we did a little test run, so let's make sure that I do it correctly. All right, let me get to my, it'll be just a second. All right, so what we are doing today is we're going to be featuring this sweater vest by a Milwaukee veteran, and I'll tell his story partway through the program. I want to make sure that I have my drawing started, and I'll tell you a little bit of background about Eugene Stanoch from Milwaukee. This sweater vest, how is this Christmas theme, you might ask? Well, his mother knitted him this sweater for during World War II. And this is from a Red Cross. There was a standard Red Cross sweater pattern that people could get the pattern and knit for the troops overseas. I'll tell you a little bit more about this. But again, he wore this in the Battle of the Bulge. He was briefly in the Battle of the Bulge and was injured on Christmas Eve. So It is not what you would typically think of as a Christmas theme narrative, but I think it's an important story to share. Plus, I really wanted to start looking at textures, and we're going to look at fabric and textures. And knit fabric has its own little nuances. So the picture on the left that you see on the screen is the sweater that we're going to be drawing. I just want to show you some basic materials that we will be using. Oh, and we didn't take care of a little housekeeping. For those of you that haven't joined us before, all of your video and mics are muted. So if you have any questions, we do follow the chat function. That's why Molly's joining us here today. She's my eyes and ears, so to speak. So if you have any questions, if I need to slow down, if I need to review something, put it in the chat and we will answer your questions. I can see the chat as well, so I'm usually on top of that, but Molly will chime in if I didn't see it. So slow me down if you need. I have a tendency to talk fast, so we'll go from there. For tonight, drink and draw, we try to make sure that we can have these lessons with things that you might have around the house. What you see on the screen here is a drink and draw kit that we sell at the museum. It's a Creatology basic drawing kit. And so that is, we're going to be just doing some eraser drawing, graphite using pencils. These have your standard like 2B up to 4B, some soft and hard leads. A 2H pencil, just a regular school pencil, will work for what we're doing tonight too. This little gray eraser up top, let me put this little gray eraser up here. Hang on, I'm not on the right. This here is a little gum eraser. It's always good to have that when we do this type of drawing. And then the white eraser is helpful too. The gum eraser that you see here is like a kneaded eraser, and you can like really mold it to make really fine lines. And then the other things, you don't have to have these available, but if you ever do get a little drawing kit, these are really helpful for the type of drawing I'm going to be showing tonight. These are the little daubers and their little blend sticks. They're just really wound up, really tight pieces of paper. So you can use a paper towel, you can use a scrap piece of paper, or you can like wedge up a scrap piece of paper to do the same thing. Also, a like nice little soft cloth will do. Fingertip is the way I did it as I was a kid. I'll talk more about that as we get into the drawing about how I draw. And of course, pencil sharpener, keep your lead sharp. And when we start getting into our toning of our page, using the side of your pencil is an important trick. So we've got a little bit of details going on to start with. So I will start at my home screen. We are using pencils. I am using a digital format. So I'm using the algorithm that shows pencil technique and graphite. So I'll be describing this process like using a pencil, even though I am drawing on the computer. And you'll see it's going to look just like a pencil. So not sure. Let's see. Slide 1. All right. So this sweater here to the left, one of the reasons why I picked it is this reference image here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit to start with. I will have it zoomed out throughout. So if you want, you can listen to the tutorial and draw along with what I'm teaching, or part of Drink and Draw is just for all of us to gather around and draw something fun. So if you want to just look at the image and focus and draw it at your own pace, you're welcome to do so. You're welcome to do the technique I'm showing or draw with whatever materials you have with you tonight. This I'm zooming in because I wanted to show you these interesting textures that we're going to be working with. So I'm zooming in on, I put another layer here, but all of these lines, if I go in a different color and show you, when I zoom in, you can see, look at this grid pattern that starts forming on all these knit. And what I love about this sweater is it was hand knit. This is not a machine knit garment. So you're going to have a little bit, not everything is going to be exactly perfect. You're going to have a little variation to the widths of all of these little channels. But we're going to create a base toned image to start with, and then we're going to go in and finalize with all these really subtle details. So I'm not going to get through the entire drawing tonight, but I did make segmented drawings for you to follow along with. So I'm not expecting everybody to complete the drawing, but I did these like sort of strategic stage drawings so that you can see how my process, how I would work. So I'll just take that out, but I just wanted to zoom in and show you the details of why I wanted to do this knit pattern. This cable knit is you can really deal with shadows and a complexity that makes a really rich final drawing. So ideally, we're going to come close to the end and start looking at a drawing that's going to look like this. And you're going to see we're going to start getting into these details, which is why we're not going to get through the whole drawing, but I wanted to show you how I work with shade, how I start dealing with fabrics. And when I deal with graphite or charcoal, I have a very painterly hand. And I'll show you a couple different ways that people choose to draw. And there's no right or wrong. It really is just a style that people pick up on their own. So we'll start with this slide here. Get the right graphite. When you're starting any drawing, you want to just sort of block it out. And I started with just a basic, sorry guys, I get ahead of myself. I started with just a basic square. And if you're dealing with the type of pencils where you have the different lead weights, you can start with like a 4H or a 6H. The harder the lead, the lighter the color, so you won't get this nice dark line that I just put on here. This is just for demonstration purposes, but if you want to give yourself a nice light background, then you want to use something that's got a harder lead to it, or just don't apply as much pressure with a real sharp tip. So I just give myself a little square, and then I see that on the sweater, this doesn't have it's not a real big curve, right? For the arm hole, it's a very it's much more straight. It's almost like a straight line that goes down with just a little bit of an angle here, right? So I'm gonna might block that subtle curvature off on either side. This side has just a little bit of more of a curve. So I'm going to block that out and see that's a little square that kind of goes out there, and then just kind of curl it down. I'm just blocking out my spatial proportions here because I like, as you can see, I've already done it. I'll fix it, but I have a tendency to get all out of whack with my proportions. But I'm a very loose sketching artist. Those that have a real tight configure, like really tight with their stiff drawings, that's okay, but sometimes you want to loosen up, just especially when you're just laying down your base image. And again, when you're doing this, you don't want necessarily this real hard pencil. You might want a little something a little bit more subtle like this, a little bit lighter, so that you're not putting down these real dark lines, because at the beginning we don't want these really dark lines. I was, again, just doing that for demonstration purposes. You really want something more like this real fine line here. That's more what you're looking for when you're laying down your preliminary drawing. So yeah, I'm just going to put this little V-neck here. And then on the shoulder, you can see it's a little curve. There's a little bit of a curvature up there. But for the most part, this is a really square looking garment, right? And a very flat. And so we're going to just a little subtle dip in the neckline here. And then this goes up. And we'll talk about a little bit about how folds of fabric go backwards, right? So this area right here is behind. It's behind this. So how you draw that, you don't want that line to, there's a certain way in which you draw those lines so that that sits backwards. And then you'll use a little bit of shading to get, we'll get into the shading here in a minute, to send, we shade it in the back. So that sends that area further to the back rather than out here, out front is going to be a little bit lighter. But so I'm just blocking, like I said, I'm just blocking this off to start with. you can see if I zoom in on the image here, and if you do go to our object record, you can click on the image on that object record and it'll make it a larger size on your screen. And you should be able to right click that and open it in a new tab as well. But if I zoom in, you can see on this sweater, you can really see there's some detail work here, right? On the bottom of that collar. This is really beautiful detail work in here. So I get off of that screen and go back to my slide one. So what we want to do is I'll go back down to the full size here. We want to go in and try to block out this collar. And it really is just a nice, I've gone a little bit too, it really is just a nice smooth line. And this is why you do this in light lines. You can even maybe do yourself a preliminary sketch just to get the feel for it. With garments, I like to do that. I'll just kind of do a warm up. Do we need to let somebody in, Molly? I don't know. There looks like there's somebody in the waiting room. I'll let you handle that, but yeah, there's a little bit of a smoother curvature to this. And then that detail I was showing you here, it's like a Y, right? So you've got a nice smooth curve, and then this goes out and makes that little flare. So I'm just blocking this in. This is a real sloppy first block. And you want to use a lighter pencil just to get this all in, get to the lay of the land, because you'll see here too, you've got on the sleeves, you've got a different double knit pattern there. So you've got a little bit more of the reinforced knit to give it just a little bit of not a cuff, but I'm sure there's a proper garment term that I'm not using, but it's going to add that strength, right, to the arm area. So I'm just blocking out that I know there's going to be a different type of texture in that area. And then as you come down here, you can see on the bottom, it changes again. You have the knit of that body changes to these. I'm just blocking that in so you get the idea of what I'm doing here. Because we're going to go in and do some more detail. And that original little rectangle that I gave myself to block this out, I can take that out with my eraser if I want. Right? So now we've got our basic concept of this sweater. And what the next step is, again, I'm going to say this 1,000 times tonight, but don't start drawing this dark, because what we're going to be doing is putting tone on our page, and I'm going to be building up layers of the graphite. And if you start really dark, even though we're going to be going in and erasing and removing content from the page, depending on the type of paper you're using, you can start to remove paper away, and it will get more and more difficult to get the effect you're looking for to erase. So when you're starting to layer, be a little bit more disciplined with how much lead you're putting down. If you're using charcoal, it's really easy to just smear charcoal on the page. Charcoal is a little bit more forgiving to be able to remove content afterwards. Graphite, especially if you draw hard like I do, I put a lot of pressure on the page. It's a lot more difficult to remove that even with an eraser, because you're actually making an impression into the paper, and that paper doesn't always bounce back. So depending on what kind of paper you're using too, that's going to make a difference. There's texture paper, there's a whole nother, the paper choice for this is a whole nother range of topic. So now that I've got that, as you guys are drawing that base layer, I'm going to go to the next phase, which we're going to add tone. And I'm going to go ahead and take my outline off. Go back. I should have duplicated that slide. I'm actually just, while you guys are working on your base drawing, I'm going to remove some of that so that my drawing is a little bit lighter after all is said and done. And I'm just doing this with an eraser on this particular drawing. Just to make my lines a little lighter. All right, so now that you've got your base drawing, what I want to do is I want to add tone to the background. And when I say adding tone, if you add charcoal, you're going to layer a bunch of, you're just going to add charcoal to the back of your page. We've done this before in a drawing in one of our other drink and draws. But what I'm going to do is take the side of my pencil. So if we go up here, I have a couple different examples. If you look, I'm going to hold the pencil with the side of my hand. And on the bottom, I have a architecture drafting pencil. So the lead is sticking out. It's sharpened a little bit more, but you can sharpen your pencil and get that nice side edge. And then I'm going to just start adding some graphite onto the page using the side of the pencil. So filling up the page with graphite. So let me take that back off, go back to slide 2. And the reason I'm doing that, and let me make sure I have the right lead. I'm just going to use the standard pencil. And I'm going to test. So this one is actually really dark. I don't want this one. I'm going to choose a different pencil on my. So as you can see, I'm starting to just go with the side of the pencil here. And on this particular sweater, because it's got that grid pattern, I'm just going to go side to side. Just going to go across like this and start filling in. And don't worry, we're going to be removing content out of it with our eraser. We're going to be smudging. So I'm just going to add some graphite to the side of my page here to give it, my paper, a nice tone. And I might even go this way since, again, we have a grid pattern. But you can see I'm adding it so it's lighter. It's not, I'm not doing this, right? I'm not making it like dark, dark, dark. I don't want that. And what I'm going to do is that little smudge tool that I showed you in the drawing kit, or with the top of your finger, you can just go through, and I'm just going to start smudging this all together. When I say smudge, it's just like a blend. Some people, if that you use Prismacolor color pencils, you see that blend, that blender that comes with it, that blend pencil. We're going to be doing this with our finger, just with the graphite. I'm just giving a tone to my page, this nice gray tone to the back of the image. And this is going to help us when we start building shadows in the drawing. We start adding the texture in. It's going to start pushing stuff a lot further forward, and we're not going to have to add it all together. We're going to just keep layering into it. And that's why it's important that we do this layer lightly. Don't add a ton of lead onto the page. We're just going really light. And if you're on paper, those background lines are going to be blending together too. I didn't can do that, and I could probably start blending some of those in too. So this process will take a few minutes for you to start filling that in. So if you want to take a second, I'm going to go ahead and give you a little background. I told you pretty much the story about Eugene, but if you go to the object, you're going to see that this sweater was made for Eugene by his mother, whose name was Casmira, and it was likely made from the man's V-neck sweater sleeveless pattern that was widely distributed by the Red Cross at that time. Now, if you Google or you want to do if you love to do research, look up the V-neck pattern by the American Red Cross. The Red Cross distributed a lot of free patterns for scarves, mittens, a lot of materials that people on the home front could knit and send to the soldiers overseas to help with supply demands. Those, if you're not familiar with the Battle of the Bulge, those that fought in the Battle of the Bulge were in the middle of the most extreme conditions, winter conditions, snow and freezing temperatures. And so this sweater likely wouldn't have really made a dent, but it would have helped. It would have helped with layering in that. So little things from the home front were really helpful. Eugene Stanoch served overseas, like I said, from 1944 to 45. He had just graduated high school when he was drafted, and he was in the Ardennes region of France. He was born in Milwaukee and was inducted in the Army in February of 44, and he was with Company A of the 289th Infantry Regiment, 75th Infantry Division, and briefly in the Battle of the Bulge until he was wounded on Christmas Eve. He was acting as a scout for his unit when he was injured multiple times in his arm and leg during a small arms firefight, and 2 of the fellow members of his unit dragged him back to safety. He returned stateside to Colorado, where he endured a lengthy recovery period. He did, in fact, recover and was medically discharged in September of 1945. So we're really fortunate to have this sweater that's attached to a really powerful story as well. I always love doing this because these are objects you wouldn't actually connect this with Christmas if you didn't take the time to actually look and see the story behind the object. And the last 2 years for our Christmas drink and draw, we've always done some sort of holiday card or some sort of holiday memory. I think we did actually something from Pearl Harbor last year, though, from one of our veterans that was a survivor of Pearl Harbor, because drink and draw, I think, fell on the 7th last year. So now that you've got your tone added to your page and you've smudged it together, so I'm doing a really quick, like, blending of this gray. I'm going to cheat a little and just really blend that all together to create this nice gray tone pattern. So for the sake of time, you can see I'm really kind of willy-nilly just going left and right. When you do this, you want to be a little bit more conscientious of how you're smudging and the directions you're going, because I'll show you as we start developing in this image, that type of movement, you see how I've already created like this grid line with the smudging. You can actually use that to your advantage. For example, up in this area here, if we look closely at the image, you can start to see little shadows developing right in that area. So if I took the time to add a little of that tone there, and then when I'm smudging, I can really start smudging in the direction that those shadows are falling in, and that's going to help develop the dimension of that fabric. And if you've got all these like weird directions that don't make any sense, it might make for a fun drawing, but if you're trying to do something closer to realistic, you want to think about how you're putting down these marks. Use them to your advantage. You can always go in and add to and remove, but work smarter, not harder. Use it to your advantage. It also I also like to feel like in my mind when I'm drawing, I actually am thinking about the texture. I'm thinking about the feeling of the direction that I'm going, the movement of the pattern to fill where the shadows might fall, to fill where those folds might fall. Not just focusing on exactly what you're drawing, thinking about what is this object? How would it feel? If there are bumps on it, that might make my pencil move. If I were to actually just rub my pencil against the knit, it might actually buckle, right? It might actually bump, and that might make a little fidget with the line on my artwork. That's just how I think. So now that we've got the tone on the page, then we're going to start to maybe go in and add some of these details, right? Like really start to go in and look at those shadows that I was talking about. So if we go in, I'm going to zoom in on mine. Obviously, if you're drawing with a pencil and paper, you're welcome to use a magnifying glass, but turn your image the way that it's helpful to you. You can also, if you're referring to the image on your computer after this class or during this class, if you have double monitors, you can always zoom in on the image to really focus on the details that we're going to be working on. Because I told you, for those of you that are drawing at your own pace, I'm going to leave the image just like that on the screen so that you have it available to you. And for me, I'm going to have another screen up. So I'm going to start going in and working on a little bit of the details on this collar. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to get my graphite. I still have a standard pencil. I'm going to go with a little bit darker pencil now. And sharp lead on this one is okay. I'm going to be using the side of my pencil a little bit. We're going to be developing a little bit of the shadow here and getting this area a little bit tidier. Okay. So there's this little curve here where it comes up like this. And this is sort of a trick, like if you're drawing ribbons too, keeping an eye on where shadows fall. You can see the shadow falls back here, right? And it gives the illusion that the fabric is going behind. And then as you go up here, you come up to the top and it comes down at an angle. We've got a little shade in here. And then we come down to the top of this neckline. But it's gonna do the same thing over here. So if we've got this little area, if I zoom in here to show you, you see this little area here where the fabric just falls subtly behind to the back, right? If you're thinking about lights and darks and shadows, the way we see things usually, there are always exceptions to the rule. I'll zoom back out for you. Is that the darker objects are further back. And that's why when we start working with shadows and we add highlights, it pushes things forward. So we're going to go back here. And that's, like I said, this back here is very, very flat, right? It's not very curved at all. And then I'm going to go in a little and fix this shadow and get in here. And when I start adding shadows, there's a couple different ways that people draw and sketch. Some people like to use cross-hatching to add dimension and to add the layers of their color. So if you're just doing a line and then you cross-hatch, right? And then you just keep adding hatches until you've built up colors. That's one way. Some people just like to do directional, the same direction of lines. And you can continue to add on that, or where you want more darkness, you add them closer together. And then as it gets lighter, you start pulling the lines further and further apart, right? To create the depth. Some people like to draw that way. Some people like to do a combo of all of those. There's another technique that I wanted to feature today. We're just not going to be able to get into it, and that's stippling. We'll do another class on stippling, and that's using this little, I'll zoom in so you can see this little dot pattern to really start adding your lights and darks. We'll do a little bit of that on the final details, but these are the different types of techniques of sketching, or a combo of all of these. I'm a blender. I'm a painterly artist, so my artwork often has a more painterly feel, and by doing the blending is how I get the painterly feel. So I do a lot of layering and a lot of blending. So you'll see that here now in a second when I start adding the shadow. Because this that I'm doing right now, we're not even near the final detail that we're going to be put on this. So this is still a very beginning phase of the layering. So I'm going to go dark, but I'm not going to go too crazy because I'm still layering my work. So I'm going to get my blending tool and start blending this graphite. And when you do that, if you have a soft enough lead that you've been using, the softer the lead, a little bit easier to blend. It's very difficult with the harder leads to do this. It's not impossible. It's just that the softer leads are going to give you a little bit, they're going to be more generous with how much is going down on the paper, but it's also going to be easier to maneuver that around. And this is done a lot with charcoal. So I use this drawing technique with charcoal quite frequently. But you can see how it's really rich and dark in the back, and then it starts to get, you start to pull that gray out, right? And then it starts to get lighter as you move out. And that's what I'm looking for, is to just really give myself an opportunity. And again, I'm using a different pencil. I'm on a little bit lighter pencil now to go back. And I'm just barely drawing on the surface there because I don't want, again, I don't want to do that. Not right now. So I'm just adding a little bit more tone down here. And then that shadow goes all the way along the interior of that collar, right? It's going to set it. Now I'm going to take my blend tool. I'm going to start blending again. I'm just going to keep doing that and add those layers. And as I get to this point in here, I'm going to go up here and start to add that top piece. Now, if you look at the sweater, right, you've got these, you know what I think I'm going to do so I don't move that? I'm going to add, bear with me 1 second. All right, so if you look, well, that didn't work. I was just going to show you, as you start to look on the sweater, on that collar, you can see that the lines go a different direction, right? So if we're on the collar, the lines on this collar go like this, in this direction, and the lines in the sweater are going this direction, right? So that's going to help differentiate this piece from this piece, is knowing which direction those lines are going. And we're not going to be doing the details of those yet. We're going to be working on the shadows of that. So let me scroll back out for you. So knowing that those lines go in that direction, I'm going to start adding a little bit of those lines here. Again, we're not doing detail work now. So I'm going to start creating some of that shadow point. So some of these, just adding a little tone in where the shadows are going to end up. And when you get to the point where you're doing detail work, all of this prep work, all of this prep drawing is going to be so worth it, because you're already going to know where the little highlights are going to have to go, where all of the extra shadows and details are going to have to go. Some folks might work on one tiny part at a time. That's okay. Again, there's no right or wrong to this. So then I'm going to get my smudge tool again and just really start. And if you're not used to doing this, you might feel like you're just making a big muddy mess at first. And sometimes you will. This takes practice to figure out how you want to layer or what technique you want to use. I'm pretty comfortable where I'm at with my drawing skills, so I don't worry about it too much, because I always know I can go back and take my eraser, for example. And I can, when we're at the end part, you can see I'm going to start pulling out material with the eraser, and it starts adding highlights and it gives you dimension. So if I mess up in this phase, I'm not overly worried about it, because you can always add and remove later. You just want to be aware of how much you're adding and how hard you're pressing on the paper when you do this. But right now I'm just adding material that's gonna give me the basis for the details down the way, and it also is helping me lay out the exact proportions of the sweater. If you're more measurement based and you like your things a lot more perfect, I think those drawings come out beautifully. I have a much more loose impressionist hand, so I don't make things that look exactly like the finished piece. I'm a little bit more whimsical with my lines, and I don't beat myself up because I've practiced the like very, very detailed way. And you don't get to, as my art teacher said, you don't get to have a style until you've learned all the other styles and practice them. Then you can have a style. You don't just come into the world with your own unique style. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit more. I'm going to keep an eye on my time too, because we still have a little bit of ways to go. So you can see here, I've really started to add these shadows, right? And I will usually spend a lot of time building this stuff up, because I love, one of my favorite things is this like recess in space, going from dark, getting to gray, then getting a little bit lighter. That's one of my, I just think it's so beautiful when it's done, and it's done well. It's got this just such a rich look to it, especially if you get the highlight on the top of this, you know, on the top part. When you're finished with your details, if you can get that highlight just right, so it really looks as though that's falling back into space, you've accomplished something when you're able to do that. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm going to go to another screen, but you want to spend some time developing some of this shadow. Let's see, that one's already on. Go to slide 4. You can see I had started developing the shadow there in that color. One of the things as we start blending, when it comes to fabric, the knit is a little bit more interesting to teach this on, because cotton or like a blouse material, you're going to naturally see where the fabric drapes, right? So for example, let me change color of my, so I can show you this. This is a very two-dimensional photograph, right? It's shot from bird's eye view, looking straight down. So you don't see a lot of where the fabric drapes or the texture of it. We see a little bit of a buckle here, right? Because of the way the knit is bound at that area. And that's part of the design, and part of it's also the imperfection of a hand knit object, where it starts to bunch up in this area, right? But you can start to see what I'm looking for when I'm going to add my shadows is if you took all of these knit grid off of this image, right? What you would see is a two-dimensional object with shadows falling. If I zoom in here, you can see this little, I want to put this down so it's almost like highlighter. If you look at this area, right, there's like a little shadow of where there's a little bit of a loose image. You can start to see where the drape, as we call it, where the fabric drapes just a little bit. It has body to it, right? You see this shadow, this almost looks like a Y right there. That's because the fabric is just gravity works. There's a little bit of shadow, and then there's a little bit of shadow in here, right? If we think about when we're looking at somebody wearing a shirt, where does it wrinkle, right? On my t-shirt, I have wrinkles on where my shoulder, where the sleeve starts to meet. You can see this wrinkle here, right? Where the knits are connecting with each other, right? These types of, see this shadow that's built up by the bulk of the knit right there. The reason why I'm doing this in pink for you is so that you can see when I'm looking to draw that tone for those shadows, I'm looking where there's weight to it, right? Where there's a little natural shadow is taking place because the material itself is changing. The material itself is bound in such a way that it's creating shadows because the way that knit is reflecting light is different than how this little area is reflecting light. So when I'm looking to add tone, I'm looking at all these areas here where there's just little subtle, if we were looking at a cotton shirt, these would be little subtle wrinkles in the shirt. And all of that tone, when it's said and done, might be subtle in the background, but look how much dimension it's given just if we look at it in pink. Look how much that garment, in my opinion, has much more movement, is much more alive than just if you were just to take a drawing and do this, right, and make a cartoon out of it, right? If I were to do that and then fill that with color, right, and just fill it with solid color, it's probably a bad example because of the way it laid down. But if I do a square and then just fill it with color, it's just flat. It doesn't do anything. But then you can see even on this where I did those drawings with the tone underneath, it creates those folds. So I think you guys get what I'm saying. So actually we'll do that and take all those off. All right. All right. I have another one of those. So let's go back to, I'm going to fast forward a little bit. So we've got, if you've started adding, you can really see where I've added that tone on there. And before I start drawing in pink, I'm going to change my color back. I started building up tone. You can see where those little, only problem with dealing with the digital is I forget what layer I'm on. You start to see where I've started the shadows, right? The shadows are starting to happen. And the reason I showed you that in pink is because when we start going in and adding more detail on that original tone, if I go and take this layer off, you see that original tone is just a flat layer of gray. There's not a lot of those folds in there. I worked on this a little bit more, and so I started adding where the different lines fell. And I'm just gonna, I want to make sure. So if I go in and I look at that sweater where we were doing the pink lines, like for example, where that Y is, right? I'm gonna take my pencil. I think that color will work. Go up. And across the bottom here is just a little subtle line. And I'm slightly adding some of the pencil, and it makes sort of a Y. I'm just going to add a little bit. And then right underneath here, where this meets, you can see where the knit makes that real, binds up just a little bit, and it curves up. And there's a little curve here, and then it comes down. I'm going to really pucker that, make that little pucker happen and come down. And then just use the side of my pencil, and really, there's a lot of shadow on this side here. And now that I've added those shadows, they're not going to stay like that. I'm going to take my smudge tool and just really start blending it in there. And sometimes you can overblend a little bit. Sometimes you want a little bit of that imperfection to happen. I like to get it really smooth. That's the painter in me coming out, but I do want to add, if you are using the side of your finger for this technique, you're going to end up with a really sloppy page. You should keep a clean sheet of paper next to you so you don't put fingerprints all over the outside of your drawing. Sometimes that's a fun element to keep in there and add and use fingerprints as part of the drawing. But if you're trying to make a nice clean drawing, and you're using your fingerprints, keep a nice rag around so you can wipe your hands off consistently, and you have another piece of paper to maneuver your drawing around with. So you can see I'm kind of getting heavy on this a little bit here, and that's just because I'm rushed, but you can see where you can really get some nice subtle tones up here. If you take your time, you can really just make it a nice subtle blend. And this is where I was talking about directional blending, where that comes to play. If all of a sudden, and I'm going to do this on purpose, all of a sudden I just start doing this sideways, right? I've lost all of that angled line, that Y that we had. So what's the point in continuing to layer if you're just going to do that? So think about what you're doing in the direction. You're actually going in the direction of the fold when you blend this together in this. And I did a lot of that blending up here above on the lines. I want to get into a little bit of the details because we're going to wrap up. This is, I get these ambitious drawing prompts for these classes, and part of that is just the fun part of this is that you can challenge yourself, but I can never get through an entire drawing because of that. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go to, is it that one? I think so. Yeah. So if we're here and we've got these blended areas already really developed for the lower layer of our drawing, and we want to start moving in and getting some really detailed work, what we want to do is we want to look at the garment and start really examining these really detailed lines, right? It's just a beautiful grid pattern. But it's not just straight up and down lines, right? Like there's a curvature to the yarn being woven in and out of one another. There's a curvature to those lines. It's not just a flat grid. So if we start, I want to show you on the sweater up here. So if you look at this, this isn't just a flat shoulder, right? And then a grid that comes down like this. We don't want that. That's no fun. We want to look, if you look closely, this is going to have like a little bump system, right? Where that yarn goes. So what's really lovely is starting that curved, these little curved pipettes up here, and taking your time. I'm doing this on an outline so you can see what I'm referring to, but if you take the time to look a lot closer, you can really see that you have beautiful curvatures that start to happen. And then you start to see that there's almost like a wonderful spiral here that creates just this quadrant up here that like almost reinforced knit at the top, even though I don't think this top area is reinforced. It's just an optical illusion. These lines do continue all the way down. But as you continue down, you'll see also that it's not just straight up and down, right? Like you've got a little, you don't have to be a perfectionist with this. You have room to actually draw a little bit of a crooked line. But keep in mind, you don't want to go to the point where you're like this, right? Because then that changes the whole knit pattern. But thinking about these beautiful uniform lines that have a little bit of an imperfection to them, and then you can, same with when you start going across, it's not just a straight line across, you've got a little bit of a wiggle pattern there, right? So I'm going to get off of that and go back to this layer. Yeah, so I'm zoomed in on that layer. We'll get back to my graphite color. And you can see that where I did that there, where I really, this is also where you'd want a nice sharp pencil. I'd go with like a medium lead, or you can even go with the softer as you get. I'd start with a harder lead to give you your base area that you're going to go with, so you have a little bit of room for forgiveness. And then after you've got a good foundation laid out, then you're going to go in with a little bit softer lead to get this nice dark, a little bit richer. You can really see the light source. This is where it's helpful to know where your light source is from, so you can see which side the shadow is being cast on. Again, this is a very bird's eye view. This is photographed for archival purposes, so we don't have a artistic light setup here. So I'm just going to make some decisions and do a little bit darker on the right side. But I'm just going in and I'm seeing where each one of those rows might come in, and you see the curve of the shoulder, right? It's not just straight. I'm actually taking the time to go to give it dimension of how the sweater might actually have that curvature that sits over the shadow. And then eventually you're going to want to pull those lines all the way down. And that's where you're going to have to start to see here on the sweater where the lines start here. If I do this little, where they start here. On some patterns, you're going to have an interesting dart. And when I say a dart, it's going to go in like this to create a little bit of room. This one doesn't have it. This one looks like it's just a straight knit that comes down. It does, if you look here, it does sort of go up like this into a little, almost looks like the top of a boat there. But yeah, you want to pull your lines down and make sure that you're keeping consistent lines. I'm getting sloppy here. And then go across, and it's almost like a little wave pattern.
Yvette, I'm just going to let you know that we are at the top of the hour, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to show just a real quick detail, and then we'll wrap it up. So you can see in here where we've started to make these little squares, and they're a little bulbous, right? Because of the way the knit, you think about knit, it's yarn that's basically woven on top of each other and creates a knot. So each one of these is essentially a knot, the head of a knot. And so I'm going to just sort of highlight the exterior part. And again, we're going to end up blending again. That's where those little tools are helpful, because you can make those little blending tools with a little sharp point too, so you can get into these little nooks and crannies in here and really create some wonderful different gray tones. And then it really starts to come together when you get your eraser on top of that, and then you create this little highlight. So that's how you start to get these almost little chiclet medallions. And then up here, you can see you start developing this little line. You can start pulling out material with the eraser, give yourself those highlights, and it starts creating this incredible depth and dimension. And when you pull out, even more so, if you imagine that detail along this entire garment, how beautiful this drawing will become. And then as you get into the detail of the collar here, this wonderful chain pattern, you'll start to, I'll need to get on that layer, include that layer. You can really start to use your eraser and pull out those highlights in here too. It's almost like there'll be another grid pattern of highlights in there. But yeah, there's so much you can do with layering and adding color back in, and then doing a little bit of smudging and going back in. And then when you start to add those final details, you can really get a lot of dimension. I didn't get a chance to get into the zigzag pattern either. I was starting to really work in here. If you look at the pattern up in here, you start to have that area where you're going to go light to dark again, like I talked about, where you really get it dark up in the top, and then you pull it out and smudge, and it gets a little bit of gray, and then you get that highlighter in and really give it that dimension, that depth in there. Why won't my eraser? I wonder if it's... Yeah, so you can really start to make it really feel like it's recessed in space and give yourself those really strong highlights on the variation. And if you do that all the way down, you're going to have, again, another beautiful detail across the whole entire sweater. So that's a really quick intro to textures and those knot patterns. And this could become quite the obsession if you let yourself. This type of drawing is beautiful when you use charcoal, or you could use, the sienna charcoal, or even in colored pencils, you start adding color. I wanted to keep it simple for tonight. Otherwise, I would have used a brown colored pencil, and this would have been really gorgeous. You could always end up doing a nice watercolor wash on top of this. We are at the top of our hour. When we start in 2023, we might be adding a few more minutes, because I'll be doing some pre-recorded sessions, so we'll be able to have some time and knock it out. But I didn't see any questions out there. But I'm so happy that all of you joined us today. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. It was a little bit more complex, even though it is quite simple in its concept. I think it's a cool story. Not cool, it's an important story that we tell, and I like to share these stories with everybody and give you a little direction to our archives. There's a ton of objects, a ton of stories from Wisconsin veterans within our archives. We haven't even scratched the surface, and more drink and draw opportunities to come. So I will see everybody in February. I'm going to toss it back to Eric so he can tell you about upcoming programs at the museum. But again, my name's Yvette. Thank you all for joining me tonight. You're welcome to, Molly, if you want to put the email, we do. For those of you that haven't joined us before, you can send us a picture of your drawing. And then in the next drink and draws, I'll share them with everybody. We don't do the live share of people's drawings anymore for security reasons. But Molly just put the address for the email in the chat. You also can ask questions of me through that email if you have any questions about the drawing or about the technique. You all have a wonderful holiday season. It was a pleasure to see you again. And I'm going to toss it back to you, Eric. And thanks, Molly, for all your assistance tonight.
Yeah, like Yvette said, we'd be happy to see your drawings. We really like to see them. We used to be able to show them, but like Yvette said, for security reasons, we have a lot of jokers out there. We try to keep them off. So we've had to enable some of our security features. But, if regardless of what you think of your drawing, send it along. We still like to see it anyway. It turns out most of the time that people who don't think their drawing is worth anything, Yvette points out just fantastic components of it. And it's just always nice to see how everybody progresses too. We do have 2 more events left this year in 2022 for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. Next Friday night will be our movie discussion night. This year we're looking at the 2008 film, The Hurt Locker. And then the following Tuesday will be our final trivia night for 2022. So if you were interested in movies or trivia or both, we'd love to see you come out. Once again, Yvette, thanks so much. Fantastic job as always. And of course, Molly, thanks for all your assistance tonight too. I hope everybody has a great Christmas if I don't see you at movie night or at trivia. And a happy new year to you as well. And at the very least, we'll hopefully see you in February for our next drink and draw event. Have a great weekend, everybody. If you're in the Madison area, go out there and build a snowman. If you're in someplace warmer, please enjoy that. Good night, everyone, and we'll see you next time.